Good morning, everyone. It's a pretty small crowd, but that's okay. I still enjoyed coming here this morning. Spring's right around the corner, right? This is the last big snow. I was out pushing a ton of snow for like all the neighbors and whatnot yesterday, and everybody's tired of the snow. And I was talking to the one neighbor lady, and she's like, she has some flowers started. I'm like thinking maybe I should start mine flowers too. We'll see. Hopefully, maybe this week. I was going through my daily devotions reading this week, and one of the days was about one of the stories in the Bible that we very seldom hear about for some weird reason. And that story is the golden serpent. Do you guys know about the golden serpent in the wilderness? All you kids? You know, what's that? Or bronze serpent. Sorry. Same kind of color. Bronze serpent, sorry. In the wilderness. It's such an interesting story. And there's just a few parallels there in that story that that kind of stood out to me, and it's kind of a short little story or passage, and I just want to read that and just make a few comments on that. So if you want to turn to Numbers 21, and we'll start reading at verse 4 down to verse 9 or so. Okay, Numbers 21, verse 4. From Mount Hor, they set out by the way to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the reason why they're going around the land of Edom is because the Edomites wouldn't let them travel through their land, I believe. It was Esau's descendants, and if you read back a little bit further, they came to the Edomites and they're like, "Hey, we're your cousins. Let us walk through your land." And they said, "No, go around." Anyhow, and the people became impatient on the way, and the people spoke against God and Moses. "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and water. We loathe this worthless food." Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many of the people of Israel died. And the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpent from us." So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten, when he sees it, shall live." So Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole, and if a serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. Isn't that amazing? Such a, it's an Old Testament story, and yet it is so powerful. When I was reading through this or listening to it, in my devotions, I was just taken away by this story once again. It's just if we go back up, why is man like this? Why does he when God gives him everything, supplies his needs, gave the Israelites manna in the wilderness every day consistently except on Sunday, and then when they were hungry for meat, he gave them quail, as much quail as they wanted, and then when they were thirsty, he gave them water. And it's just all these things that God is continually giving them, and yet they complain. And that's exactly how I am in my life too. I hate to say it, I hate myself when I do it. I look back on my life and see all the many blessings God has given me, and I find myself complaining that I wish something would have happened this way, or I wish my life could be better, be different, or whatever we're complaining about in our life. And it's such a people thing to do, to complain. And it's, yeah, just like, this is how many years ago, and yet today I find myself doing the exact same thing. And then we see God's response. Like he just gets, let's see, in verse, verse 6, God says, or the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people. And it was just like swift judgment. Like, okay, you're going to complain about the food I give you and everything I give you, or you're going to complain about the cheeseburger that I bought for you. Okay, well then you can't have it. And then God says, okay, you're going to die because you're complaining. It's just like you see the kind of the parent in God coming out. Like he's like, okay, I'm going to punish you for always complaining. And it's just, it's so like that, like the cause and effect type thing. And then as we go down a little bit further, the people realize their sin. They're like, it's because I'm a sinner and I'm not grateful. This is why this is happening. They make that connection, just like we do. Like, and they go to Moses and they say, "Can you please intercede to God for us?" And we see how Moses does that time and time again for the people of Israel. And I believe this event happened right after he struck the rock instead of spoke to it, or however that went. And then God said, since you didn't do what I told you to do, you can't go into the promised land. And but here again, like Moses could have been like, you know what, whatever, I'm not going into the promised land, so you guys can just die, I guess, essentially. But he's a merciful man too. He's a forgiving man, even though all these people spoke against him. And he's like, he prays to the Lord, and then the Lord tells Moses what to do. And I was just thinking, like, as a person, like, I wonder how long it took for Moses to make this bronze serpent. Like, it probably felt like eternity to the people of Israel. And one thing I really wanted to pull out here is when they lifted their eyes upon the bronze serpent, they were saved. Why did God tell Moses to make a bronze serpent? Well, the serpent was the cause of their pain, suffering, and death. So looking upon an image of what caused the pain, suffering, and death, they would have to look at that in order to have healing and life. Isn't that awesome? So basically what happened is the thing that caused you pain or killed you essentially saved you. And that was such an interesting thought to me. I was like, man, that is so crazy. Like why a serpent, you know? Because it caused death, but then it also caused life. And the thing about that, the cool thing about that is Jesus was the exact same way. If you want to turn to Deuteronomy, I'll just read those verses. Deuteronomy 21, 22, and 23. And if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree. His body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him sorry, lost my place. You shall bury him the same day, for a hanged man is cursed by God. You shall not defile your land that the Lord your God is giving to you for an inheritance. So, Deuteronomy 21. Anybody that was hanged on a tree was cursed. Who was hanged on a tree? Jesus Christ. He was hanged on a tree. Cursed is, like it says, like Jesus took our sin, and he was hung on the tree for our transgression. Jesus took the curse upon himself. The sign of our death, the sign of our sin, is the symbol of his victory on the cross. Jesus is carrying my sin. That's the symbol of my sin. When Jesus is on the cross, he is the symbol of my hope. So it's just those two comparisons. Jesus on the cross, he took my sins, and looking at him on the cross, the reason he died for me gives me hope. It was such an interesting study or reading or whatever, and I just was like, man, I have to share this on Sunday. When I found out that I had to have devotions, it's just it's a win-win for us. Like, if we fully commit our lives to Christ and to give him power over our lives and do what he wants us to do, we can find victory and salvation and life with him on the cross. With that, you guys are dismissed for Sunday school.
I made it up the steps all on my own. Figure if I stay ahead of it. The last song we sang is, it's one of those songs that when we sing it, no matter, I think it happens every time, there's a few times during the song where I just stop singing because I'm like, I get goosebumps and I'm just kind of, the emotion hits. And so I just want to read a couple lines here. Verse 3, my sin, and then he says, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to his cross, and I bear it no more. It's like I can just hear him expressing himself. It's like his sin, my sin, our sin is nailed to the cross. And then the last verse, the Lord hastes the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so it is well with my soul. There's a day coming, and I hope it's sooner rather than later, when the Lord is returning, and the clouds will be rolled back, and it's going to be a powerful and amazing experience. I hope that when that day happens, I'm one of those who is experiencing excitement and joy. There's going to be a lot of people who they experience fear and uncertainty. And I hope that, I can be, and I hope that all of you can be those people who are filled with joy at the sound of that trumpet. So I thank you, Ivan, for the songs this morning. I have been blessed to be here, and it has been a joy this morning. Let's pause for prayer. Father in heaven, we come to you this morning thanking you for another opportunity to worship together in this way. Thank you for the freedom to do so. Thank you for your presence in our lives. Thank you that you love us. Thank you that you care about us. Thank you for what we've heard so far this morning, and I just pray that your presence would be felt. Open our hearts and our ears to hear your word. Help us to learn, to be challenged, to grow, and to be witnesses of you, and to not be ashamed of the gospel, to not be ashamed of you, Father. I pray that you would speak through me, guide my lips, and I just pray that you'd bless the rest of our service. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. There was a man walking one summer day, probably in the fall, and as he walked along, he noticed a Little League game going on, and so he thought, well, I'll stop by and take in a few innings. And as he was standing there watching, he asked one of the youngsters there, one of the children, what the score was. And the kid replied, we're losing 18-0. And so the man thought about this for a minute, and he says, well, I must say you don't look too discouraged. And the boy replied, discouraged? Why should we be discouraged? We haven't even come up to bat yet. Sometimes I wish I had the outlook or the view on life that kids do. It's easy as adults sometimes to get discouraged by the things that are going on in life. Things can seem overwhelming and look pretty discouraging, but I believe there's a lot of positive things if we take a look around us. All I got to do is think about my three girls and see their energy and their joy, and they never cease to encourage me. They're always ready to come and help Dad carry his stuff in when I get home from work. Generally speaking, they're upstairs, and when I pull into the garage, I'll open the car door and I'll just hear a pounding of feet as they run downstairs, and they want to know what they can help carry in. So children have a way of seeing life different, and I am thankful for that. This morning, for a topic, I would like to take a peek or a look at and go through a story in the Bible, an account in the Bible. It's personally one of my favorite happenings in the Bible. And there's different reasons for that. When I think about and reflect on stuff that has taken place in my life, surrounding experiences, I go back to this story, and so I value it, and I think it's really neat. There are some neat things about it, to me anyway, some interesting things. And so I want to go through it. I hope I don't bore you, but I believe it is interesting, and I think there's some things we can learn from it. So if you would, turn in your Bibles to Joshua chapter 6. And we're going to read, and it's a lot of verses, but we're going to read the whole chapter. I debated and tried to figure out if there was a way to shorten it up, but I feel like it's worth it to read the whole chapter, so that's what we're going to do. So, the heading of my Bible says the fall of Jericho. So, we know what this is about. And leading up to this, before these verses, in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 1, it says this: "Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today, to go into dispossessed nations, greater and mightier than you. Cities great and fortified up to heaven. A people great and tall, the sons of Anakim, whom you know and of whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the sons of Anak? Know therefore today that he who goes over before you as a consuming fire is the Lord your God. He will destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall drive them out and make them perish quickly, as the Lord has promised you." So this was Moses talking to the children of Israel about going into the promised land. So it says, this is what's going to happen. You're going to overtake, you're going to drive the people of these cities out, these cities that were great and fortified to heaven. So this is what's going to happen, and this morning we're going to read through Joshua 6, and we're going to read about one of those cities and what happened. So let's begin in verse 1. "Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. The people shall go up, every one straight before him." I'm just going to pause for a second. So as you're listening to this, you're going to hear it repeated later. So pay attention to that, okay? It's important. Verse 6, "So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. And just as Joshua had commanded the people, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets with the ark of the covenant of the Lord following them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark, while the trumpets blew continually. But Joshua commanded the people, "You shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout." So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, and the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned into the camp. So they did for 6 days. On the 7th day they rose early at the dawn of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that was within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she had hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord." So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. But to the 2 men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all her belongings to her, as you swore to her." So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought out all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Joshua laid an oath on them at the time, saying, "Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. Lots of verses, familiar verses. This morning I want to, as we kind of make our way through this, I want to try to paint a little picture for you. And maybe you've done your own study, I don't know, so I hope I don't bore you, but the children of Israel are moving out, and they're moving into the promised land. And it's my understanding that Jericho was the first order of business. This was the first city that they were going to overtake. They were going to conquer. Jericho, it was no small feat. It was a big task. It was as Moses said, it was fortified to the sky. So my understanding is that the city of Jericho, the walls specifically, but the whole city, it started with a retaining wall, and this retaining wall was made out of stone, and it was somewhere around 12 to 15 feet tall. And I was trying to, as I was going through this, I was trying to put it into some perspective, and I wasn't coming up with any good ideas, but I was looking here this morning at the church, and I would say 12, somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 feet probably gets you to the top of the curved, like the blue wall, soon to be beige. So I would say 12 to 15 feet probably gets you pretty close to there. So that's the first portion of the wall. And keep in mind, this is all built on a hill or a slope, okay? So that's the first portion of the wall. From there, there was a mud wall on top of that was 6 feet thick and was an additional 20 to 26 feet taller on top of that. So I don't know how tall it is from floor to ceiling here. It's got to be somewhere in that 20-foot range, I would guess. So you have a stone wall, 15 feet. On top of that, 20 more feet, you have a mud wall. Okay? So we're getting pretty tall. From there, you kept walking up the slope on the inside of the city, and it was approximately from ground level, so from the bottom where they were starting, at 46 feet high, that was the bottom, was the second wall. Okay? And that wall was, again, 20 to 26 feet tall. So if you do all the math, you end up from where they were standing looking up, you end up somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 feet to the top of the wall. 70 feet is way up there. Very tall. And it was all uphill as you were going. Inside that top wall, the top bowl, if you will, the land itself was about 6 acres, or 4.5-ish football fields. That was the inside of the upper bowl. If you account for everything, the total area of the city was somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 or 10 acres inside these walls. The normal population, and these numbers, I found one article that said that archaeologists use 100 people per acre. Another article said they use 200 people per acre. So I don't know for sure, but if you kind of use that, if you say 200 people per acre, you're looking at around 1,200 people inside the upper bowl. That was normal population, not including anybody in the outer ring. And because of what was going on, so if you recall in verse 1, it says the city was shut up because the children of Israel were in the land. So more than likely, there were people from the surrounding area that had come to the city to seek refuge because the children of Israel were present. So the city probably was housing several thousand people. We don't know for sure. Little more crowded than normal. And so this is what the children of Israel were marching around. This is what they were trying to lay siege to. Back then, if you were to lay siege to a city, there were several ways to do it. One of them was to maybe try to light a fire to weaken the walls. Another one was sometimes they would build a ramp out of dirt or whatever they could find, and then they would crawl over the wall. Well, think about how tall of walls that we're dealing with. That's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to suffer a lot, like many casualties in that time. It's not going to go very well. The other option was to simply wait the people out. So circle the whole city and just wait, starve them out. However, there's a couple of verses in Joshua that would lead us to believe that this time was shortly after harvest. So there was probably a lot of food in the city, and there was a spring that came up in the city. So they had a lot of fresh water, they had a lot of food, and waiting them out was going to take potentially years. Don't know how long, but it probably was going to take a long time. So 3 options, not great options. So what happens? Well, God gives Joshua some instructions, and he says, this is what I want you to do. Here's an idea. And what is Joshua's response? Well, he hears God's plan, and we don't read about any questions. It says that he goes and he tells the people, this is what God wants us to do. He wants us to march around the city once a day for 6 days, and on the 7th day, we're going to go 7 times. And notice he said that the people were to remain completely quiet. Not a word was to utter out of their mouth. That can't have been easy. You got all these people marching around the city. I'm sure there was some desire to talk to your neighbor, like, what are we doing? Why are we here? What's going on? This seems a little crazy. And there was a lot of people marching around the city. How many? I wish I could give you an exact number, but Numbers 26, they do a census of how many fighting men there were over the age of 20. And in Numbers 26, it gives us a number of 601,730. It's a lot of men. Traditionally, it's believed that there were about 2 million people that came out of Egypt, so that could be a realistic number. And kind of a side note that I think is, to me, it's intriguing, but if you think about 2 million people, if you were to stand 10 people in a line and then space the lines 3 feet apart, you would have about 115 miles, I think, of people walking if you were to stand 10 wide, 3 feet apart. That doesn't include livestock, provisions, or anything like that. That's a lot of people. Joshua 4:13, that verse makes it sound like maybe there's closer to 40,000 fighting men that were ready to go out to battle. So regardless of the number, there was a lot of people that were getting ready to march around the city, and they were to be quiet. They did this for a day, and then they did it for 2 days. And I would tend to believe that there were probably some questions that came up in camp at night. They were probably trying to figure out what was going on. As I was studying this, my mind went to the VeggieTales episode. So they do an episode of this story, and when they're marching around, the way they tell it, the people marching are talking to some peas that are sitting on the wall who are in the city, and the peas are very confident in their city, in the wall. They believe that they're not, the walls aren't going to fall, and during the one conversation, one of the peas knocks his Slurpee off the wall, and it falls down and lands on a couple of the vegetables. So, and I always go back to that because I would think that as the people are marching, there's probably people in the city that were hurling insults at them. They were probably not saying very nice things. This was a difficult thing. This wasn't easy for them. It wasn't just, this is what God wants, so therefore do it. It was difficult. And that's the way it is sometimes in our lives, right? God asks us to do things. He requires things of us that are difficult, that we question and we're uncomfortable with and we don't like. But that doesn't change the fact that he requires obedience from us, and he wants things from us, even though to us they seem uncomfortable. So on the seventh day, they march around it 7 times, and after the 7th time, when the trumpet sounds, they're to give a shout. And this is thousands of people. These are trumpets. This, I can only imagine the noise that carried on. We were at a hockey game Friday night, and there was moments in that hockey game that were very loud, but I would imagine this was probably way more loud, way more noise than in that hockey game. And what happened? Well, if we look at verse 5 first, verse 5 says, so this is God talking to Joshua and telling them what to do. He says, and when they make a long blast with a ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. So God's talking to Joshua, and he says, this is what's going to happen. This is how things are going to take place. If we jump ahead to verse 20, it reads this way, so the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Sound familiar? God said this is how it's going to happen, and that's exactly what happened. The wall fell down, and in archaeological digs, it would appear like the wall essentially fell on itself and created a way in which you could walk straight into the city. So what God was saying to Joshua is, when the wall falls, everybody will be able to walk essentially in a line into the city. So you're not going to have to pick your way through it. You're going to be able to walk straight in. And that's exactly what happened. They were able to walk straight into the city. When they did that, everything was utterly destroyed. God had told them to kill every living thing. The only thing that they were to take was the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron, and not for themselves, but for the Lord. He said, kill everything else, and that was what they did. They destroyed everything. They utterly destroyed everything, except one person and her family. Who was that? That was Rahab. She was the one who had hid the spies when they had come to scope out the land. According to a German excavation done between 1907 and 1909, they found that a section of the wall on the north of the city was still standing at a height of over 2 meters. Not only this, but there are houses built on that section of the wall. This would have been overflow housing. So this was not on the inner wall, this was on the outer wall. This is where, if you weren't well off, if you were poor, maybe this is where you lived. It wasn't a great place to live, because if in war, if the enemy came over the wall, well, your house was potentially going to be the first one that they came upon. But not Rahab's. Hers was saved. God protected them, and as a result, if we read the genealogy of Jesus, the lineage, he came out of that. So, what can we learn from this event, from the Battle of Jericho, as it were? Well, one, we see that obedience to God's commands is very important. In Joshua 6, verse 2, we read that the city, Jericho, was already theirs. God said it is yours, but it required an act of obedience on their part in order to actually receive it. That was to do something that seemed a little bit outlandish. It was by faith that the people shouted and the walls fell down. Now, when you think about that in our own minds, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, people shouted, trumpets blew, and the walls fell down. Doesn't make sense. But, like I said before, God, what he wants from us doesn't always make sense. Things maybe don't line up. God could have brought the walls down without the marching, without the shouting, but he wanted some action on their part. There was, yesterday morning, after breakfast, we were talking as a family, and I don't even know how it came up, but I was talking to the girls about a quarterback he's a very good quarterback in the NFL, and he has, since this last season ended, he's been trying to figure out what he wants to do going forward. Is he going to retire? Is he going to stay with the team that he's currently with? Is he going to try to find a new team, get traded, whatever it is? And one thing he did in an effort to figure this out was he went on this darkness retreat, I think is what they call it. So he essentially gave everything up, and he went into a room that is completely dark, no light in whatsoever, and he stayed there for 4 days. So in this room, there's a bed, there is a shower, there's a toilet, there's a small table, and there's a light switch that is for emergencies only, and they put a cover over the switch so that you can't accidentally bump it. The door is left unlocked, so you are free to go if you want, and they've got ways to bring the food in so that, and they bring the food 3 meals every evening, and they have ways in which they do that so that there's no light let in even when that happens. So 4 days he spent in darkness trying to figure out his future, in whether it be in the NFL or beyond that. And I find it interesting how people today are always looking for ways to try to determine the future. What does the future hold? What am I going to do with my life? Where do I go from here? I struggle with those questions at times. I do. And there's a lot of ways and a lot of things you can do to try to figure that out. But I told the girls, we have something that the world around us doesn't have. Jeffrey mentioned it in Sunday school. We have something that is real. We have Jesus Christ. And he gives us peace. He gives us direction if we trust him, if we read his word, if we listen to what he has for us. 1 John 5, 1-5 says, "Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves whoever has been born of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?" We also, as we go through this, we see that what God requires of us doesn't make sense, and I mentioned this a few times, but his ideas don't always line up with ours. Hebrews 10:23 says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." God is faithful. And Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." Jake talked about hope in his message on Thursday, and that really struck me again, how we have hope. We have hope for the future. The resurrection has been something that has been on my mind a lot recently. We have the resurrection to look forward to, that time to reconnect with those who have gone on before us. We also see that God's power is supernatural. Did he need the shouts? Did he need the trumpets? No, absolutely not. There are people who make the argument that because of the noise it created an earthquake and that's why the walls fell. I do not believe that. I believe that God brought those walls down through his supernatural power. It was simply the mighty power of God. We also see that God keeps his promises. In Joshua 6, verse 2, like I said, he had promised them the city. And then if we read verse 20, it says that everything happened the way God said it would. He kept his promise. Hebrews 6 talks about Abraham and the promise that was given to him. What was that promise? That promise was a son. And because of Abraham's faithfulness, he received that promise. Now, if you read about Abraham, you could argue, well, was he really faithful? And I was thinking about that as I was kind of listening in on Men's Sunday School this morning, and John Whitman was talking about his witness at work. And we as people are not perfect. I am not perfect. And if I would ask you guys, I would say none of you could say that you are perfect. And we mess up. But what are we trying to achieve? What does our witness say? Where are we going? And I've said this before, but my great-grandpa used to say, God is not concerned with where you're at. He's concerned with where you're going. Where are you headed? What is the trajectory of your Christian life? Are you growing? What is your witness to those around you? Are you working on sharing with people? Are you trying to grow that aspect of that area of your life? So this morning, as you take in what I've shared, I hope that it can be an encouragement. I hope it's a challenge to you. Maybe you're facing something that doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe it seems or feels overwhelming. I believe God has plans for each one of us. And if we simply read his word, if we are faithful to his commandments, if we are obedient to his word, then he is going to do, and he will do, good things in our lives, amazing things in our lives, because he is faithful and his power is supernatural. Thank you.